NM cable is permitted to be run on top of partitions within suspended ceiling areas. The National Electrical Code, specifically the 2014 edition, restricts the use of NM cable only in unfinished attics and crawl spaces. Therefore, placing NM cable on top of partitions within a suspended ceiling does not violate the code. To further clarify the permissible uses and restrictions of NM cable, it's essential to understand the relevant sections of the National Electrical Code. Article 334 covers non-metallic sheet cable types NM, NMC, and NMS. This article outlines the permitted uses and installations of these cable types. NM cable, as defined in the code, is a factory assembly of two or more insulated conductors with an overall non-metallic sheath. It's commonly used in residential and some commercial wiring for branch circuits and feeders. The primary restriction to remember is that NM cable cannot be used in exposed applications in unfinished basements or crawl spaces or where subject to physical damage. The exception to this rule is where it is run along joists or rafters. The code explicitly states where NM cable is not allowed, and these locations are primarily areas where the cable is likely to be exposed to physical damage or environmental conditions that could degrade the cable's insulation. For instance, NM cable cannot be embedded in plaster, concrete, or aggregate. It is also prohibited in hazardous locations and corrosive environments. Understanding the specific wording of the code is crucial. The code states that NM cable shall be protected from physical damage where passing through a floor. This protection can be achieved by using conduit or other approved means. Similarly, where NM cable is run parallel to framing members, it should be secured to those members to prevent sagging and potential damage. In suspended ceiling areas, NM cable can be run without additional protection, provided it is not exposed to physical damage. The key is to ensure that the cable is supported at intervals specified by the code and that it is not subjected to excessive strain. Now let's delve deeper into the installation requirements. When running NM cable through walls or partitions, it must be protected from nails or screws by a steel plate or bushing where there is a possibility that they could penetrate the cable. The purpose of this protection is to prevent accidental damage to the cable's insulation, which could lead to short circuits or ground faults. The code also addresses the ampacity of NM cable. The ampacity of a conductor is its current carrying capacity in amps. The ampacity of NM cable is typically limited to that of a 60°C conductor, even if the individual conductors within the cable are rated for high temperatures. This limitation is due to the overall thermal characteristics of the cable assembly. For example, if you are using 14 American wire gauge NM cable, its ampacity is limited to 15 amps, even though the individual conductors may be rated for high temperatures. Similarly, 12 American wire gauge NM cable is limited to 20 amps, and 10 American wire gauge NM cable is limited to 30 amps. It's essential to choose the correct size of NM cable based on the load it will be carrying and to ensure that the cable is protected by an appropriately sized circuit breaker or fuse. Another important consideration is the proper grounding of electrical systems using NM cable. The code requires that all metal enclosures, such as junction boxes and electrical panels, be properly grounded to provide a low impedance path for fault current. This grounding helps to protect against electrical shock and to prevent the build-up of static electricity. The grounding conductor within NM cable is typically a bare copper wire that is connected to the metal enclosure and to the grounding electrode system. Now let's discuss some common mistakes that are made when installing NM cable. One common mistake is to over-tighten cable connectors, which can damage the cable's insulation. Another mistake is to run NM cable in areas where it is exposed to moisture or corrosive substances. These conditions can degrade the cable's insulation and lead to premature failure. It's also important to avoid bending NM cable too sharply, as this can damage the conductors within the cable. The code specifies a minimum bending radius for NM cable to prevent this type of damage. Another important aspect of working with NM cable is proper labeling. All circuits must be clearly labeled to indicate their purpose and the loads they serve. This labeling helps to prevent confusion and makes it easier to troubleshoot electrical problems in the future. The labels should be durable and easy to read, and they should be securely attached to the electrical panel or junction box. When making connections with an NM cable, it's essential to use the proper type of connectors. These connectors are designed to provide a secure and reliable connection between the cable and the electrical device. They also help to protect the cable from physical damage and to prevent moisture from entering the connection. It's important to follow the manufacturer's instructions when installing these connectors to ensure that they are properly tightened and that they provide a good electrical connection. In addition to the general requirements for NM cable, there are also some specific rules that apply to certain types of installations. For example, when running NM cable through metal studs, it must be protected by a steel sleeve or bushing to prevent damage from the sharp edges of the studs. Similarly, when running NM cable through concrete or masonry walls, it must be protected by conduit or other approved means. These requirements are designed to ensure that the cable is protected from physical damage and that it will provide reliable service for many years. It's also important to be aware of any local codes or regulations that may apply to NM cable installations. Some jurisdictions may have additional requirements that are not covered by the National Electrical Code. It's always a good idea to check with the local electrical inspector to ensure that your installation complies with all applicable codes and regulations. In summary, NM cable is a versatile and widely used wiring method, but it's important to follow the code and to use the proper installation techniques. By understanding the rules and regulations that apply to NM cable, you can ensure that your electrical system is safe, reliable, and code compliant. Remember to always consult the National Electrical Code for the most up-to-date information and to seek the advice of a qualified electrician if you have any questions or concerns. Now let's consider some practical examples of how NM cable is used in various applications. In a typical residential wiring system, NM cable is used to supply power to lighting fixtures, receptacles, and appliances. The cable is run from the electrical panel to the various outlets and switches throughout the house. The size of the cable is determined by the load it will be carrying, and it's essential to choose the correct size to prevent overheating and potential fire hazards. In a commercial building, NM cable may be used to supply power to office equipment, lighting systems, and other electrical devices. However, in many commercial applications, other wiring methods, such as conduit, may be preferred due to their greater durability and resistance to physical damage. The choice of wiring method depends on the specific requirements of the installation and the environmental conditions to which the cable will be exposed. When running NM cable in a suspended ceiling, it's important to support the cable at intervals specified by the code. This support can be provided by cable ties, straps, or other approved means. The cable should be supported in such a way that it is not subjected to excessive strain and that it is protected from physical damage. It's also important to ensure that the cable is not exposed to moisture or corrosive substances, as these conditions can degrade the cable's insulation and lead to premature failure. In addition to the physical installation of NM cable, it's also important to consider the electrical safety aspects of the installation. All circuits must be properly grounded to provide a low impedance path for fault current. This grounding helps to protect against electrical shock and to prevent a build-up of static electricity. The grounding conductor within NM cable is typically a bare copper wire that is connected to the metal enclosure and to the grounding electrode system. It's also important to test the electrical system after it has been installed to ensure that it is working properly and that there are no electrical hazards. This testing should be performed by a qualified electrician using appropriate test equipment. The testing should include a continuity test to ensure that all circuits are properly grounded, an insulation resistance test to ensure that there are no shorts or ground faults, and a voltage test to ensure that the voltage levels are correct. By following these guidelines and by adhering to the National Electrical Code, you can ensure that your NM cable installation is safe, reliable, and code compliant. Remember to always consult the code for the most up-to-date information and to seek the advice of a qualified electrician if you have any questions or concerns. Let's further examine some of the specific requirements related to the protection of NM cable. The National Electrical Code mandates that NM cable be protected from physical damage in certain situations. For instance, when NM cable is run through floor joists or rafters, it should be protected by running boards or guard strips. This protection is intended to prevent the cable from being damaged by nails or screws that may be driven into the joists or rafters. Similarly, when NM cable is run through metal studs, it should be protected by bushings or grommets to prevent the cable from being cut or abraded by the sharp edges of the studs. The code also specifies that NM cable should be supported at intervals of not more than 4.5 feet and within 12 inches of every box or fretting. This support is intended to prevent the cable from sagging or becoming damaged due to its own weight. The support should be designed to avoid damaging the cable's insulation and should be securely fastened to the building structure. In addition to these general requirements, there are also some specific rules that apply to NM cable installations in certain types of buildings. For example, in commercial buildings, NM cable is generally not permitted in concealed locations in fire-rated walls or ceilings. This restriction is intended to prevent the spread of fire through the building structure. In these types of buildings, other wiring methods such as conduit are typically required. The National Electrical Code also addresses the issue of threading NM cable when multiple cables are bundled together. When multiple NM cables are bundled together, the heat generated by the conductors in the cables can cause the insulation to overheat. To prevent this overheating, the ampacity of the conductors must be derated. The amount of derating depends on the number of cables that are bundled together and the ambient temperature. The derating factors are specified in the National Electrical Code. Furthermore, the National Electrical Code provides guidance on the proper methods for splicing NM cable. Splices should be made in approved junction boxes or enclosures using connectors that are listed for use with NM cable. The connectors should be properly tightened to ensure a secure electrical connection and to prevent the wires from pulling out. The junction boxes or enclosures should be accessible for inspection and maintenance. The National Electrical Code also contains requirements for the identification of NM cable. The cable should be marked with the manufacturer's name or trademark, the type of cable, the gauge of the conductors, and the voltage rating. This marking helps to ensure that the cable is properly identified and that it is used in accordance with its intended purpose. In addition to the requirements outlined in the National Electrical Code, there may also be local codes or regulations that apply to NM cable installations. It's essential to check with the local electrical inspector to ensure that your installation complies with all applicable codes and regulations. The local codes may be more stringent than the National Electrical Code in some areas, so it's important to be aware of any local requirements. Considering the specific case of running NM cable on top of partitions in suspended ceiling areas, it is generally acceptable under the National Electrical Code, provided that the cable is supported and protected from physical damage. The key is to ensure that the cable is not exposed to conditions that could degrade its insulation or cause it to fail prematurely. As long as the cable is properly installed and maintained, it should provide reliable service for many years. Therefore, in the scenario presented, running NM cable on top of partitions in a suspended ceiling area would typically be permissible as long as it's not an open run in an unfinished attic or crawl space and the cable is adequately supported and protected from potential physical damage. Remember always to consult the latest edition of the National Electrical Code and local regulations for the most accurate and up-to-date information.